Okay, so thank you all for being here. This is actually more people sometimes than I expect to come to Swift Talks, just because of the language being very new. And I was also fairly surprised at the number of people that have already seen and started working with Swift already. So this obviously, we're going to be talking about working and building, developing iOS apps that uses Swift, which is Apple's brand new programming language. I know some of you, I've met some of you already, but my name is Michael Crump, and I work at Telerik. I do a vast variety of things at Telerik. Telerik obviously is a company that does UI components along with a lot of other things. You can find me on Twitter at mbcrump, and don't worry, I'm not going to be tweeting things like Foursquare check-ins or where I'm flying to or any of that other crazy stuff. It's pretty much technical tweets, so a lot of people always worry about following because they don't want to see that brew badge unlocked popping up all the time. And then finally, I have a blog, michaelcrump.net. Right now, I'm really one of these guys that I'm kind of all over the place because I work in a variety of roles at Telerik. So pretty much anything native, I've been working with it, from the Apple's products for the watch to Apple's iOS and then for Mac, as well as Microsoft's platforms and then Google, and I publish Google Wear apps as well. And I've got samples for those if you want to come up later and we'll chat about those. So that is pretty much it for the kind of kickoff here. And I now wanted to kind of dive into the history. So this man right here is Apple's senior vice president. And at WWDC 14, which thankfully I was there, I got to witness this live on stage. He came out and he said, hey, we've got this brand new programming language called Swift. And once he said that, he started using a couple of these words. So these words were fast, modern, safe, interactive. And one of the things that we know as developers, and we've been building applications, is that a lot of keynotes now, especially even kind of around the Microsoft world, and the Apple world and Google world, they're more of a press type of keynote. They want to use words that the press is going to kind of pick up on. So you started seeing this everywhere. And it's still even on their site today, they're using fast, modern, safe, interactive, and it's true. But when developers started taking a look at it, they started looking at some of the things that actually matter to them. Type inference, optionals, generics is obviously a big thing, especially if you've done any work in the C# type of world. And this is a funny one for me to even put up here, but it's working with strings. Anybody that's done anything with Obj-C, and there was quite a few of you that raised your hands, working with strings is just, God, it was just awful. And I mean, it was so much I wanted to pull my hair out. There was obviously a lot more. But as I was sitting there in the audience and they had announced this brand new language, this was the very first thing that I saw from iOS developers. They literally, there were so many of them, and they were just going just like this. They were like, oh, really? Are you serious? I have got to learn yet another programming language. And we all know this pain, this deep pain of I've got to learn something new. I mean, even like when I'm not a JavaScript developer, but I've been having to do more and more JavaScript. And I'm like, I don't really want to dig deep into this right now, but we were kind of forced to. But then you had the other crowd, which was the Objective-C developers, and which was my very first app, was created in Objective-C, and they had this reaction. So we all know we've done this before. We went out and we bought a book. Now this is to those that don't have any, that hasn't worked yet with Xcode. You bought a book in Objective-C, which I did this. I bought a book real early on, like around the 3, maybe 2 or 3 version of iOS. And I had it, I set it on a shelf, and that thing just sat there and sat there and sat there until I eventually was motivated enough that I could say, hey, I'm going to actually write an app. I'm going to write an app. So all of these books went straight into the garbage can for Objective-C. And as I said, every other developer up here at the top as well. They were done with it. And the reason I believe, and I've looked at various code, and when I started doing some searches on Google, I did some searches for like confusing, trying to find some, just some samples here. And this is actually one of the top results that came back from search. And the few Objective-C developers in the room will say, hey, this is very standard stuff. I mean, most people got the comments, at least at the top of it. But then when it came into like anything else, you had your if statement. The nil may be kind of a little strange, but at least you could understand the operator here. And then these brackets were slightly strange. The comma were good. The star before it, people that may have worked with C or whatever, maybe has some background and pointers. And then we started seeing things like these other weird brackets around like self and then prepare content. And then here's an example of just a property, which is 20.f. And hopefully that font is big enough that everybody in the back of the room can see it as well. So yeah, this was actually a confusing piece of code for a lot of people, which I found quite amazing. Because to me, most of it read, fairly easy, but there are some things that didn't. So with that mindset of here's how Objective-C looks, this was the second screen that they thought. They were going to get like these crazy massive amounts of errors. And yeah, I made it purposely where you couldn't really read this because the errors are just all over the place here. I just had to do something. So all of these errors, you can see you can click on one of them, then you can start debugging, and trying to figure these out. And even as our team at Telerik, when we first got into it, we were primarily C# developers. So we see Objective-C. We've seen a couple of things that kind of scared people off. But just like you and just like us as a company, we really wanted that iOS market share. And it really wasn't just us that wanted it. It was absolutely, our customers. Our customers were pushing for iOS apps because of this thing. And so since Apple names their products, almost iPhone, they didn't call it that one, Apple Watch. Everybody thought it was iWatch. But so you had your Apple Watch, you had your iPhone, you had your iPad, then you had your Mac, and then we'll just call this the iBig monitor that nobody can afford because they're like $2,000 right now. So, but we wanted to be able to hit all of these types of devices. But again, that big ugly monster keeps popping up, the Objective-C Monster. I tried to find something fairly friendly there. So the Objective-C Monster kept popping up, but we decided that we were going with Swift. And as you notice, some of the source code that we've started integrating with, and if you've seen any of our stuff, you'll start seeing the transition to Swift. And we started with first taking our example application and moving it to Swift. So we're going with Swift. And this was back, we actually released a blog post as soon as it came out, and we quickly found out something. Swift 1.0 was really just a newborn. And by the way, I am probably the only person in this whole conference that you're going to see a baby picture in their presentation. So Swift 1.0, and the reason we call it really a newborn was that so the beta came out of Xcode 6, and every single time it seemed like they were updating it, Swift was breaking. And we were like, come on, please, let's finally get to stable, a stable version here. And so anyway, we went through that pain point. And then this right here, obviously, Swift 1.0 was in June of 2014. And then if you fast forward to April of this year, Swift 1.2 became official, and that's what we started, making sure our apps were working with. And with Swift 1.2, it's just really what I started to consider a baby. So with the 1.0, it had barely kind of opened its eyes and really wasn't able to do anything. But with 1.2, it was starting to be able to stand up. A lot of the code that we were using from the 1.0 version, we were able to translate that over to the 1.2 version without too much pain. Most of it, there's the fix-it options that you can see, and I was amazed that those actually worked in 1.2. And then I was at the next conference, which was WWDC 15, where Swift 2.0 came out, and this is still obviously in beta. There was a beta that was released yesterday for iOS 9 Beta 5, also for watchOS 2, and there's also the brand new Xcode. And with 2.0, I'm actually going to start calling this a toddler. So we still obviously aren't, at a kid level or an adult level, which, I would actually call many other languages there. But here we are, Swift 2.0, there's lots of changes. I'll talk about a few of them, but in like this, for example, the Apple Watch is a really big thing. I have one of them on that I've been developing with. And with 2.0, now you can start running the code actually on the watch itself instead of running it before in 1.2 where you were running it on the actual phone. So it had to use Bluetooth low energy to transmit back and forth, which was really slow. Okay, so only got a few more slides, don't worry. I'll show you just lots of other code in just a second. So this is an example that I've seen many people at least kind of use, but this really is kind of a lie. So they start with, here's Objective-C. This is 6 lines of code here, if I can count right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 lines of code. And so you see Objective-C, and it's really, broken down into Swift. So this is a great example for people to say, hey, this is why you should, start adopting Swift. Look how easy this is. Now I can do it with 1 line. And that's true. And we were able to start condensing a lot of our code down into 1 line or 2 liners and things like that. But that's not always the case. I'll show some samples of that coming up. But when I was at WWDC 15, there was a couple of things that they started, announcing here. Obviously, with Swift 2, the next thing was UI testing in Xcode, which was absolutely amazing. So you have a text field where you're going to enter some data. You can actually click on that field. You can start entering some data. Once you enter the data, you can click a button, and you can actually create your automated testing for absolutely free, which kind of freaks a lot of companies out. We do mobile testing. There's a lot of people that do mobile testing and do UI automation testing. So that's built into it. I played with it, and I think I tweeted about it right as soon as it came out. Big and powerful. And that's just a feature of Xcode 7. Out-thinning was another thing that I just wanted to mention, just to throw out here. Out-thinning instead of your applications. And I'll tell you, the biggest person that screws this up is Microsoft. If you use Microsoft Word or any of like the Excel, you'll notice that thing is huge. It's absolutely huge. So it's like 400 megabytes for an app. I don't know about you, but like my mobile apps, I want them to be very small. I don't want them to take up, especially people with the 16 gig, phones. I mean, that kills your space. 400 megs for Outlook or for Word, screw that. I'll just, use something else. There was also a few of these other pieces, gaming APIs, some more improvements to HomeKit. But here's what actually stood out for me, was the open sourcing of Swift 2.0. This was another piece where I believe there's more PR involved in this than when you started really digging into and seeing what they actually were open sourcing, or what they had open sourced. So the things that they had open sourced was the standard compiler, and they open sourced the standard compiler, but the runtime and things of that nature was not actually open sourced. So there was a part of it that was, hey, we open source Swift, which gave them lots of great press, but not everything in Swift 2.0 is going to be open sourced. Another big one was deploying iOS apps to devices without this developer account. So we've been hit up with this over and over and over. And I know the barrier to entry, especially at my local colleges and the local colleges that I help teach and help classes with, we typically use Google and we use Android. One, because Java is so widely known. And then the other reason, Android Studio is starting to become a very mature product versus Eclipse. And the people in the classroom, they didn't really need anything to deploy to their phones, just a USB cable, and that was it. And the same way goes with Google Wear. Now you can do this without paying the $99. And I found for college students that was great. For businesses, not so much of a problem there. And then one Dev Center. So they consolidated the Mac and the iOS Dev Center into just one for $99. We saw Microsoft actually do this with their Windows Store and then with their Windows Phone Store. So we saw them consolidate those. Google all along has had just really the one paid account, the $125 that I paid back when they first started. And I don't know, I'm still able to publish apps. And then another thing that was very important to me, at least, was opening the developer forums to everyone. I never liked the idea of Google or Apple closing out their developer forums to if you don't pay, because it's information, and I really like especially developer information to be free and open for everyone, to use. So, and also you get sometimes better answers on the actual forums that Apple provides versus something like Stack Overflow, for example. Okay, so this is supposed to loop, but it didn't. But all this stuff kind of made me a little kind of giddy and kind of made me excited, and that's why I started getting into it. There he goes. Just took him a few minutes. So anyway, it made me excited, and my goal for this talk is really just to kind of get you excited to start writing some iOS apps using Swift. So one of the things, and I don't know, I was talking this morning, I don't know if I'm not sure, I think it may have been Gaines or Elijah Manor or somebody. There is so much information on how to actually, learn the Swift syntax and, getting in and building fully fledged apps. I want to just kind of get you excited and show you, hey, here's how easy this is to actually start building, piecing it together. Here's what's required. Here's what you need. Here's what you don't need. And also tips and tricks that I use and have learned as I've started building those type of applications. And then at the end, we'll wrap up, and I'll give you all of the applications, everything you see here, so you don't have to worry about writing anything down. And you'll be able to take that back home, you'll play with it, and you'll have my resources. So that's it for slides. And I'm 17 minutes, so I'm right at my mark. Actually slightly a minute over my mark. So before we start with anything here, and I'm going to have to close out a few items. The terminal, if I can go see how the terminal works here. Let's go. Okay, so the terminal is one of the places that you probably wouldn't think of this, but if you've already installed Xcode 6, then you can start writing some of your Swift code without actually having to jump into Xcode. Xcode's kind of heavy sometimes, even with the latest version of Xcode 7. So don't worry, I'm not going to be writing some elaborate program. But you can just run this XC run and then Swift, and it says, hey, welcome to Swift 1.2. Up at the top, and don't worry, my magnifier will kind of mess up if I use this, but you'll see LLDB, and you can just think of that as the debug type of thing that's running in the background. So I could start typing some code here, and if I wanted to use like a constant, I could do let first equals Michael, and then you'll see here that it went ahead and evaluated first is actually a string, it's Michael, and then if I wanted to do last, I'm just going to do the same thing here, except for I'm just going to do Crump, and again it evaluated it, and then I could start doing in things like print line, and then my name is, and we will just go first, and we will go in last, close quotes. And I'm messed up typing here, but anyway, you can see you're able. I missed a slash here, but you're able to start doing some of these things without having to actually go into Xcode. All right, so that's just one thing to remember, is that you can use XC run Swift and get to that. You can start working. You can start working with that. I'm gonna try one more time to get my slash right. I don't know. There we go. Just for completion's sake. Okay, so XA run is one. The other one that I wanted to show you was playground. So what I typically use XA run for is just those very, very short little snippets that I want to start playing with and I want to start getting used to. When I want to do something more, I use a playground. And the font is extremely large on this because I sat in the back seat before we started just to see how well that you would be able to see this. But the playgrounds in Xcode, this is obviously another thing that was new that came out in version 6. It's also in 7. It allows you to start, as it says here, a place where people can play. So I'm not going to go through any of these because the source code is completely available for this. But if I wanted to, like here's 2 variables. If I wanted to, I could just simply go ahead. I could start uncommenting those, and you can see here's one where I was playing with the semicolon, and I was just kind of playing with the format. But I didn't want to create like a new project. So we've all had like these projects where it was like named delete me or out 150 or out 160. Thankfully, you don't have to do any more of that. You can just come in here and you can start playing. You can start playing with this sort of stuff. And I'm always very interested in like how the languages will kind of interpret type of things. Like this one, for example, the first thing was that it didn't know where the line break was. And here you'll see it could say foo 3 is redundant. It's okay. We can come back and name that one foo 4, and this error should go away. There. No, you're not liking that, are you? But anyway, if you combine the lines together, and it looks like it's just not going to work too well for me. There we go. So you can see that the lines were combined together. It was looking for something here, and it also provides this kind of fix-it. So this was the fix-it that I was talking about before, and it says, okay, go ahead and insert this here. And now you can see that it added that fix-it. It went ahead and added the semicolon here, which we all know if you've been playing with Swift or looked with Swift, semicolons are not required anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go down through the rest of this application. And you can't use Obj-C in here. Obviously, this is how you would declare a string. Obj-C is not going to work in the Swift playground. And I've got various types of instances of things that you can try. Stuff like type inference. I have some different things like, who doesn't want a Unicode character in their application? Isn't this just totally awesome? Is that we can declare this. We can declare this. Let me get rid of this one. We can declare this, and we can declare a Unicode, and I could actually use that emoji and put that as, hey, this is something I want to use. Imagine somebody actually doing that. I'm going to be very interested. In my team, if they saw something like that, they would probably fire me. So I don't know. Just one of those things. Emojis for the win. So I've also got some other things in here. I've got some string operators, arrays, and then dictionaries, and we have some if statements and a switch switch statement, and I'm writing a free book on Swift that I'll provide links that I'll provide links to as well. But then you kind of get into things like loops, where there were sometimes I was kind of wondering, about the loops here. And like this one, for example, so far we've seen a lot of kind of like one-liners, here, except for the switch statements. We've seen a lot of one-liners, but here, we see, hey, this loop, this is actually going to loop 5 times. Okay, well, I didn't know that, and sometimes because people are playing with a different type of syntax, and they started, in earlier days, you may have only had like the 2. Then you notice, okay, well now it is actually working with the 3. But besides all of these other samples that you can use, you can also use different type of functions. So in this example, I've declared my function first, and Swift is actually smart enough to determine that, here it actually is being called at this point. And so I just have greet Michael and greet Friday. And I do write some smaller functions in the playgrounds as I'm just kind of, starting to play with it. And you can evaluate those. There's several playgrounds that will show you in depth, especially if you're doing any types of games of that or anything of that nature. A majority of things for us, or really 100% of things for us, is just complete line of business applications. And you can also do things like, here's another, var with shapes. And we're trying to return, the number of sides. And here's where I'm declaring, the number of sides. And it was just a great way to kind of start playing with and start seeing kind of how these different types of things all piece together. There isn't anything I've tried in a playground that doesn't really, that hasn't worked. So that will kind of take care of a lot of your language type of thing, wondering how this language works. Yes?
Do you have interfaces?
No, there's no interfaces in the playgrounds. The playgrounds is typically just for you just to start just typing things out. Now you can create an interface through code, but that also obviously is going to require, like if you wanted a button on the screen, you could create a button, but you're not going to be able to really do much with it inside of the playground. Okay, so anyway, this is available as well. So let's go ahead now, and I want to dig into kind of starting this off with at least one sort of program here. So I've got Xcode, and I'm going to go File, New, Project. And once I do File, New Project, you'll see there's a couple of different things for iOS. There's iOS applications, there's frameworks and libraries, which I'll go into that one, and then you'll see Other, which is things like in-app purchases and empty. The one that I typically use for a very first kind of quick, getting started type of demo is a single view application, because it's just completely blank, and you learn the most by starting with a blank slate. Especially, anybody here familiar with the Big Nerd Wrench guys? Yeah, I'm a fan. They're in the ATL, which is not too far from where I live, and anyway, I learned from Aaron and that group on how to really start with a blank type of application, or sometimes something simpler than this. But this is just a single view application, and I'm going to give this a product name as COTB, and we'll just go 15 to make it quick. And then we'll see a bundle identifier as net.michaelcrump.cotb. This one's linked to my personal account. Those from the Microsoft world, which I've noticed there's kind of a mix so far, the attendees that I've talked to, those from the Microsoft world are kind of used to GUIDs for their Windows applications to be uniquely identified in the store. Google and Apple uses these bundle identifiers, where it's just the reverse of your domain name, so net.michaelcrump.cotb. And you can still pick the different types of languages that you would like, Swift or Objective-C, and whichever devices. So we have iPhone, iPad, or Universal. This isn't the Universal app that Microsoft has been around. This Universal has been around for much, much longer. And this will let you target both. And core data is something that I have another sample for that will show you how to start integrating and start persisting your data, because you're going to need it early on, persisting data. So I'm going to hit next here. And we can put this under Git if we wanted to, but I've already got this saved out, so we won't really be needing that. So I am going to have to try to adjust the screen slightly to make it fit. Let me try moving this side over. Looks like it's not going to give me much more room. It's okay, we'll make it work with this. Okay, so we have a project here, and in this project we have a file structure. And you'll see that we have COTB 15, which is what I would call a virtual type of folder. In this world, these aren't really physical folders. So for example, when I get into this, I'm going to move a couple of these files that we're not going to work with out into the supporting files. So don't actually think of these as physical folders on your hard drive. So for example, the app delegate, this is one example, and in the app delegate, get rid of that, you'll see that there's several things happening here. Most of this is going to be related to how your application starts up. So anybody that's done any type of phone development, regardless, if it's Google or Microsoft or any of those other things, they're kind of used to some of these methods like, did become active, application will terminate. So we're not going to really use that, so I'm going to drag that one to the supporting files here, and I'm just going to drop that in there. And then we have our view controller.swift, and our view controller is going to be where we're going to start doing a big majority of our work. So with Objective-C, we had header files, .h and .m for header files and implementation files. Now we just have one .swift file. So you can see by default, we only really have two functions here. One's a view did load, and another one is a did receive memory warning. Then we have our storyboard, which is where we're going to start building out our application. So drag and drop is absolutely something that we can do here, we can do in this world. A lot of people were afraid, especially of the old XIB, Xcode interface builder, how painful it was to kind of get your UI right. I'm going to show you a few tips on that very quickly. And then our images are now placed into this nice images.exe assets. So you can place your images there, and they do provide a launch screen for you. And I actually thought about writing a whole blog post on this, because the splash screen that they put for you, we're kind of getting used to, splash screens were always intended as a way to kind of distract the user for a couple of seconds for our application loads. Now on our iPhone 6 devices, which are really taking over the market in the 5s and the A7 chips, we're getting to a point to where we don't necessarily need a splash screen unless we need it for personal branding, like Pepsi or one of those big companies like that really would need a splash screen. We really wouldn't. So I'm going to move that one to the supporting files as well. And yes, tests are included in Xcode 6. So let's go to the main storyboard, and I'm going to try to clean up the screen here where we can see everything. So we have just the beginnings of this main storyboard. And if I go back, we'll go ahead and see if I can adjust this screen anymore. All right, so I'm not going to be able to adjust the screen as much as I wanted to just because of the resolution. So I'm just going to leave it on this, and we're going to just work with it. So I have a view controller here, and if I wanted to start just building something very quickly, the first thing I may do is I may go ahead and grab a label. These are the labels that you're already familiar with. And I'm going to put this up at the top, and you'll notice you'll start to see these little grid lines. And if I drop that, and I go ahead and I drag that all the way over here, and let me drag it, you'll see that it went underneath the carrier information. And if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and go all the way across. And I could enter some text here if I wanted to. Again, the misconception of everything has to be done, strictly through code. You don't have to. And here I could put in something like, enter, or something like, we'll just do the same sort of sample, your name is, and then we can do sort of things like change some of the properties. Obviously, we could do all of this through code behind if we wanted to, with fonts and other things like that. But this is just a way to show you how you can start actually building this out without writing a line of code, at least to get started. So instead of text box, they use text field. And I'm going to grab text field, and I'm going to put it underneath our your name is, and then I'm going to drag it again. And let me drag it over. This may not look too pretty, but I'm trying. Okay, and so on this one, we could add stuff like placeholder text, enter your name. And then finally, if we wanted to use a button, for example, I could select a button here, and I could bring it back. I could let it snap. Actually, these are supposed to snap on this other side, or this one was. And I could take the button, and again, I'm going to just do this the same thing. I'm going to drag this over, and we will eventually get there. So we've got a couple of items that we've just added to our screen. So everything looks good, or we think. So if we went ahead and we kicked off this application just kind of as is, there's our splash screen. Splash screen looks great, but our content is all over the place. Our content's messed up, and if we click in here, especially with the enter your name part, we can type. Obviously, we haven't hooked up anything to this, but we can't also dismiss the keyboard. So these are some of the things that you're going to run into very, 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 very quickly. But thankfully, there is quite a bit of solutions for each one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust. And one of the things that you'll learn, like I have learned by doing talking to customers and coming out to conferences, is that Xcode was built for these. Remember that 2K monitor that I just showed you? Xcode was built for really high resolution displays. And I've noticed that anything that I run it on, if you're not running at least I would say 1024, well, maybe even more higher than that, you're going to have a difficult time navigating around. All right, so we've went ahead and we've added a couple of items here, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start connecting these together. I'm going to get rid of the controls because we no longer need those, and I'm going to go back, and there is a button here that is called the document outline. And I can click on the document outline if I wanted to, and you could think of this, especially if you built any type of mobile apps, this is your way that you can see your different types of views, and you can start dragging them over and start working with them. So I'm going to start this. This is in our main, our view controller.swift. I'm going to grab the label first, and only just because it's easier, and I'm going to hold down the option button. Well, the control button here I had on sticky keys, but it looks like it went away. And I'm going to let go, and I'm just going to use a naming convention that's familiar to everybody, which is like LBL for labels, TXT. Apple doesn't recommend that. Apple recommends that you actually, give it a fully qualified name, but I find that it's easier for people to kind of grasp at least the beginning concepts by doing it that way. So I'm just going to do TXT name. And so this is an outlet, so this means that this is going to be able to do things like set properties, change different properties on the screen. In just a second, we'll use an action, which is going to allow you to send messages, which we're going to need for our button. So we've added the one for our label. I'm going to do the same sort of thing, and I'm going to add this one, and I'm just going to do TXT name. Yep, I made it wrong. Good deal. Thank you so much. Now, we should be able, oops, it's not liking that. Yep. All right, hang on. There, we try this one more time. Oh, I named the other one TXT name. That was a big goof. We're just going to do it simple. Yeah, I've royally screwed this piece of it up. The funny thing is that this is the easiest part of it. So, well, yeah. All right, so what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to switch over. I'm going to close out of this project and come back up here to Finder, and I'm going to go to Red, and I'm going to go to Code on the Beach. I'm going to go to Swift, and we're going to go to one of the completed solutions for this one, as sad as it sounds. Okay, so here we're back again, and so the only thing that I was doing, this also may save some time of just watching me type, since it's taking a little bit longer. So here I've done the same sort of thing, except for I've named them kind of goofy again. But we have our label name, we have a field, and then we have a button that's actually hooked up in our main.storyboard. It's the same sort of thing with the click me. You can see the same user interface that we had before. And then in our view controller, get rid of this guy, and I'll come back over to this. You'll see the only thing that is really I've done here is I've just went ahead and I've added in my txt entername.txt, and then I'm actually just going to nil out the rest of that value. So it's just 2 lines of code here, and that's kind of it for the first kind of demo. But one of the things that you'll run into is that whenever you start working with this, to get rid of that keyboard, there's a couple of different ways to get rid of it. One of it is the touches began event, and with the touches began event, you can actually just do this self.view.inEditing and true. You can also do it for return, for the return key. And then if we launch this application, and we'll see it finally on our screen here. And right now we should be able to automatically go up, and we should go down. And you'll see that I could add my name in here. And just as a quick kind of demo of some of the things that you can do, this actually teaches you a lot of kind of core concepts. You know, from everything with starting to work with storyboards. One of the things that I didn't get to show you because that last piece kind of failed, but was the constraints that was in that you are going to have to dig into, and you're going to have to start working with. And the constraints, you can see those listed here. And when I say constraints, what I mean is each individual piece that I just put on my screen here, like your name is, and enter your name, and click me, every single piece of that, it has to know what's the vertical position. So if you hover over these things, you can see here's like the vertical space, the center X alignment, and there's more like the trailing alignment. And the thing about all of this is that as we're starting to get more and more and more iPhones, we're starting to have to fight more of the battle. So we know how Android's fragmentation system is, where there's so many different phones and tablets and things like that. Apple, it was just golden. We were able just to run with it. And now, now we're starting to see more of these things. One of the things that will help you out is that as you start getting used to and start building these out, there is this button here that I wish I could zoom in, but I hope everybody sees it. It looks kind of like maybe a TIE fighter from Star Wars or something. If you click on this and you don't have anything added, you can actually come and you can add the missing constraints. Now, I wouldn't typically do that in very many occasions, unless you have something simple, but it will add those constraints for you. but I have found that in real-world applications that on all the different devices, we typically go with iPhone 4, 5, and 6 right now of devices that we're going to support, that it doesn't work necessarily all the time. And you can see these constraints, they've been added in here. And so I can click on one, and this one right here is the vertical space from the carrier information down to where the your name is starts. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so I want to show you a few other things here. So whenever I started building applications, especially if it's like an application that maybe for a new language or a new web app or something like that we need, the first thing I like to do is I like to say, hey, show me like some sort of app that's actually in the App Store that people are using today, and some of the source code behind it. So I wrote 2 apps just for a conference, and so this is one of them. This one was called the Task application, and this one is one that's published. It's a very simple task application, but it uses a lot of things like multiple views, and it also uses core data. You're also passing data back and forth between screens, and I found that I published this on GitHub, and it's been picked up on a couple of Swift newsletters and things like that. But this application here, this is a couple of screens, and you can see it, and in action, it should be, let's get rid of that one, and let's go to this one. You can see here's kind of an example of kind of what it happens here. So go to Target, buy Game of Thrones Season 4, which was big on my to-do list, and then you could switch over and you could see it and you could start delete, and you could delete it, for example. Okay, so let's take a look at maybe how I would start building and piecing some of that together, and then we'll wrap up with maybe some watches and some other resources that I have. So I'm going to go back yet again to our favorite thing, which is Xcode. Let me go ahead and close that project, and well, let me see if I can find the one that I was working on last, which should be this one. Okay, so here we are. We are back. We're inside of Xcode again. There's nothing really different here. We just have task application. There is an M here. I have this under source, and I've been trying to start adding a little bit of documentation for people that are brand new to this. But if you come back up to the file, and then you go new, and you go project, and you select this tabbed application here, it will stub this out for you. And also Xcode's not like Visual Studio, where now it would have created like a brand new project. Don't you just kind of hate that if there's any Visual Studio users in here? It's just a pain. I didn't want a new app. So you don't have to worry about that. So here is the app that it creates for you. So you have this tab bar, and I'll just collapse that. You have the tab bar controller, and then we have these 2 buttons here that are already wired up, and you can create these connections yourself very easily, especially if you look back at the document outline. And you'll see that I've only added a couple of things. Table view. Table view is something that if you build any iOS application, you're going to be using a table view at some point in your app. And then I went ahead and I've changed this icon down at the very bottom. So funny is that a lot of people that when they first begin and they first set out at doing this, they're always asking, where did you actually find that at? So if you click on it, there's images that's here, and by default they just named one called first, and they called the other one just called second. And these are actually PDF files. And what's funny, you change it here, it automatically changes it on the other side. So that was just a kind of another kind of thing just to.
Are those PDF or PNG files?
They're PDF. The last time I looked, now they may have changed it, but it was a PDF, and I thought that was really odd. Very odd.
Well, PDF is kind of handled fairly efficiently in macOS and iOS, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, and you know what? One thing we could do, so that was create no, that was the report card. We could come back over here to this one, and we could go to images.exe assets. And I think this is where I originally, I think I had either opened and started exploring this project. Show in Finder. Yeah, it's a PDF. They were using the PDF, and I was like, it kind of blew my mind. But then it starts to make sense, just like you said, with the Mac OS world. But that's real weird for that small of a thing to be a PDF. Okay, so back at our application, this is what I first started. And these are named first view controller and second view controller. You can go ahead and safely rename those to something else if you want to, if you start up your first application. And again, I just simply had an add task, and I wired up some of these buttons. But what I needed to do was I needed to be able to transfer the information that was being added here over to my other screen, and then I needed a way to start deleting that. So what I did was I created a task manager.swift, and this task manager was going to be the way that I was going to start managing, I was going to be able to start calling different pieces of my task. So basically here we've got a var task manager equals task manager, and then I'm just simply using a struct with a name and a description, and you didn't have to put this not defined, you could put whatever. That way I could actually call a task manager, and I could go to the task and I could do a .name or a .description. And then this is just a simple array. This was the very first kind of start as how I'm kind of getting this. Just a var task, and then giving it the name of task as my array, and then a simple function that just has a name that's looking for a string as well as a description with a string, and then it's just appending it to that task. In each of my view controllers here, especially if I take a look at the second view controller, you'll see that here's obviously the things that we were looking at earlier, where I added the text field, I added a second text field. I didn't have to do anything in the stubbed out code, but in the actual button clicked event, and I'll fix the screen one more time. In the fixed event here, I was able to check to see, this was one way, obviously you could use nil if you wanted to, just to see if there was anything inside of that field. Then we were going to start adding this record. And so I could add it by just simply calling my task manager.addTask. And then I'm dismissing the keyboard, which we saw before. And then I'm getting rid of the touches began, and then this is going to handle if they hit the return button. On my main view controller, this is where kind of it starts tying in all together. On the main view controller, whenever you first start seeing this, you'll notice that I went ahead and added in these protocols, UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. And the reason I like to show this part of the table view data source, if you hold down the command key here and you click on this button, then you will see the protocol, and you'll see there's only two methods here. One that's the number of rows in section, and then the second one is this table view, and it's going to be cell for rows at index path. Everything else you'll see is optional. So what that means with everything else being optional is that you don't actually have to implement that or put any of those pieces in there. So I've only implemented, obviously I added my action to my UI table view, and then I'm using a task of reload data, which was in that same one. And then as I scroll down, in order to get how many rows I actually need to add, I'm just calling that array.task and then .count, because it's looking for some integer to be returned. And then finally, where I start adding in this table view, and again, this is a ton of code, but this all stubs out for you once you start typing. You have to define what type of cell type you're going to use. And in this example, I'm using a subtitle approach where basically you get the header and then a subtitle right below it. And then I'm assigning down at the bottom the text for the text label. And I'm using taskmanager.task and then our index path.row with the name, the same thing for the description. And then when I want to start committing the editing style, and this is again optional, you don't have to use it. Obviously all of the gradient IntelliSense and stuff like that you're already used to is available for you. So here's delete. You could obviously go to insert, and it would provide these animations for you out of the box. So I have a task manager.task and then a remove at index, and it's just going to remove the current one that was selected. And then we're going to reload the data. So I'll run this application very quickly, and once I run this out, it looks like this. Looks like I may have to zoom back out some. Scale. Let's go to, yeah, everybody can read that one. Let's go. I'll try going up one more to 33%. Yeah, it doesn't look too great on the screen, but anyway, you can kind of see my point here. You know, we'll just do target again, and then buy something. And then you could hit the save button, and then you could switch back over, and you'll see it there, and you'll see the animation that was kind of provided out of the box. Now, this is one that's not actually going to persist any data because I didn't actually add core data. When you add core data, you're basically going to be using SQLite. Okay, so I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions and answers, but what I wanted to show you was that I have quite a bit of other things. So I'll give you this link at the very end, but this is Code on the Beach, and here obviously is where you can grab things like the slides. Here is a full breakdown of everything that happened in WWDC, as well as the playground and then the apps. And then I built a couple of other sample apps. What was this, like 23 hours ago? I built a couple of other sample apps that if you want to start looking at table views and then also like pull in data from APIs, like web services and things like that. iTunes has an open one that you can work with. But all of these apps are here. And then finally, the Apple Watch. This is an Apple Watch that I made. I don't know if you're like me, but I never know what these things mean. I mean, I look at them like all the time. And so, you know, I've got this app on my watch, and I look at them, I don't know what they mean. So, you know, I have to click one of them. And this was, I found that actually the data that is inside of each of these emojis, you can get the Unicode value, and you can actually extract that. And I've seen tons of people still in that code, which was great because it was something that I didn't know existed. I didn't know that you could do it. But that application is available as well, and the source code to it is ready to go. Just load it up in Xcode 6. Okay, I'm going to finish up with just a few more slides, and then we will be able to talk maybe for a few more minutes and let the next person come on in. Like I said, lots of stuff here. So I'm going to go over to this slide, and this one is the resources. So again, Apple just updated these books, so it's just Swift. You can find that from the iBooks application. They've updated it for 2.0. One of the things about updating it for 2.0 is that now you can go ahead and download Xcode 7 and you can start playing with it now. Hopefully it's not going to be as bad with changing of Swift. And then, like I said, if you really want that deeper dive and you don't have the Pluralsight course, and by the way, they're handing out 30-day Pluralsight vouchers in the main desk. You can always also hit me up, and I can give you one of them as well because I'm a Pluralsight author. But you can search for Stanford Swift, completely free, and you can download their course. The only thing is that course is only for the Swift, and I think he covers a little bit of 1.2, but that's a very long course. The official blog is the only blog that I really pay attention to, and there's a couple of great newsletters. And don't worry about the slides, the source code, I've got that on my last slide. Next two small things I wanted to talk about was I'm a part of the UI for iOS team. We have a variety of controls and stuff. You want to chat with me? We'll chat in the back. Other thing is we're also building a product called NativeScript. I'm in these rooms. I talk to a lot of different developers. Some people don't want to write Swift. They don't want to write, they don't want to do Xcode. They don't want to do any of this stuff. They want to use XML. They want to use CSS and JavaScript. Native Script is completely open source. It's a product that we've built, and I'll also be able to talk to you about that. So that is absolutely it. And again, the only link that you really need is just github.com, mbcrump, and then COTB 2015. And if you just go to my repo, you'll see that's the last one that I updated like 2 hours ago, because that's how I roll. So anyway, with that, I think we have, about 5-10 minutes of questions. So if you have any questions, I'd love to start taking those. Yes?
So I was just going to ask, I've been doing iOS development for a number of years now. The machine that I've been doing it on is an old Mac Pro, and I'm contemplating replacing it, and I don't want to get one of the new Mac Pros. I was just going to see what your recommendations were for as far as like hardware, like i5, i7 as far as the processor, and now with the newer, newer sized phones like the iOS, the iPhone 6, for example, I think it's like 1080 by 1024, so it's the simulator now is larger, just like in your presentation, it's larger than the display I have, and I was just going to see some feedback from you as far as what kind of hardware, if somebody's going to go out and start doing this type of development, what kind of hardware should they get?
Yeah, so his question was really regarding the hardware, especially with these later versions of Xcode. A lot of this was kind of just because of the resolution that I had to use, here. So what I use, this is an i7, and the reason that I picked the i7, and I don't have one of those really expensive monitors, but I have another. I'd have another external monitor. But I really recommend the MacBook Pros because you can do so much with the MacBook Pros. I don't know if you're strictly doing just iOS work, but for me, I'm never doing just iOS work. I'm heavily involved in Microsoft's world as well. All of us, we have to wear a million hats now. You can't just put one thing on your resume. So I'm in Windows. The thing that I found is SSD. Make sure you get. I would really like a 512, and I recommended that to many people. If you have a 512, that at least allows you to use parallels, like you may have seen on my desktop. I still have to do some Windows 8.1 stuff, and then Windows 10, obviously. So if you can, I would say go ahead and take the jump and grab on the jump on at least a MacBook Pro that is maybe last year's model or up. Hopefully that helps you.
Yes.
If that doesn't come up, you can chat some more. Okay, so what about anybody else? Come on, I know you've got some lingering questions. We're done? Okay. All right, so if you've got any other questions, then I'll see you in the back of the room. I'm also going to be here. I'm here all week, as the comedians say. So I'll be here all week. If you see me in the hallway, you don't have to awkwardly say, oh, God.